Hi everyone, it's Heidi from flutterbyheidi.co.uk. I'm Heidi Smith. I'm a silver demonstrator from the United Kingdom, and today I thought it was time that we revisited some old favourites. So for me that's Forever Fern, which is this beautiful foliage stamp set. It has got some lovely sentiments in it which make it really useful for all sorts of occasions. I particularly like this Love and Laughter Forever After. You know, weddings, anniversaries would be absolutely great. Hello, really quick and simple. But what I have done, unfortunately, is have to make a sympathy card, and so I've turned to another favourite of mine, which is Peaceful Moments. This with Deepest Sympathy is a lovely font and works really well. So that's the stamp sets I'm working with, and I thought we'd do a bit of clean and simple. So here we go. So as you can see, it's kind of a little more than a single layer. You could do this as a single layer card potentially, but because it comes, the Forever Fern comes with the most beautiful dies, I thought it was a shame not to use those. And what I've done is I've done a bit of extra colouring on the stamps. I want to show you how I've achieved that look, because although they're distinctive stamps, I just wanted to add a little bit more shading and colour to them as well. A little bit of fussy cutting. You could just stamp that and punch it out if that's not your style. We've decorated the inside as you would expect. And then I've used one of our lovely Slimline envelopes, and you know, don't forget these in the catalogue. Along with our ordinary envelopes, we've got these lovely DL envelopes for a Slimline card. So I think it's a rather elegant card and really easy to put together. So I'm going to start off with my stamping. So I've just got some scraps of basic white here. On my sample I use Blushing Bride with some Flirty Flamingo to add a bit of extra colour here. And I don't very often work with greens, so I've used a range of greens, which is most unlikely. But I thought for this one I'd go to my favourites, some purples. So I thought I'd put Fresh Freesia and Rich Raspberry together. And for my other foliage, I've got three greens. I've got a Soft Seafoam, that really pretty light green. I've got Pear Pizzazz from our Subtles range as well, and then Soft Succulent from the In Colours. So you could choose any sort of, you know, three that you've got that tone together, but I felt these worked well in terms of, you know, sort of not being too dark. So, first of all then, what I did was, let's open up some ink pads. So there's my soft seed. Other things that you'll need, blending brush. So I have blending brushes which I use for each of my kind of colour groups. So I've got one for greens. So I bought sort of 2 or 3 sets. They come in a set of 3 anyway, so you can always use 3, and they do wash really well. I just am very lazy and it's easier to just buy another set. So I've got one. So first of all what I'm going to do is ink up in my Soft Seafoam. Ink it up really well, and then I'm going to come in and just take my blending brush and add a bit of ink to it and just brush that on the edges. And I'll show you what that looks like. So this is to kind of get 2 different effects. So this will give me a really sort of subtle extra one. If I'd stamped it properly, it would have done anyway. Okay, so let me show you. Quickly clean that on my chamois. Okay, so to get a stronger colour, what I found best was to ink it up first. In fact, I've gone in the darker colour. Oh, it's all going wrong. Okay, right. Pear Pizzazz in Soft Seafoam. So ink up in Soft Seafoam. So tap, tap, tap. Then I take my pad and I just gently kind of angle just across there, and then I just use my brush just on the edges almost to take away some of that excess. So let's flip that over, and you'll see you've just got some extra shading there. If I compare that with one that's just stamped in Soft Seafoam itself, it doesn't make a lot of difference on this one, but it does add a little bit more interest. And you just see you've got hints of sort of deeper colours just on the edges there. Where it really works well is using Pear Pizzazz as my main colour, and probably because there's a bit more contrast, and then with a bit of Soft Succulent. And I'm just, say, if you can sort of see that, I'm just kind of touching the edges. It's a bit like rock and roll techniques of just coming around the edges with that. But what I'm doing is then just using the blending brush to blend it a little bit, as it can be a little bit dark and harsh lines otherwise. So you'll see there you've got this lovely some of those leaves on the outside of that deeper shade. You've got, so you want to stamp 2 of each of those. I'm just going to pop those away. I want my soft sea foam in a moment. Then I'm going to do the same with my fresh freesia and pear and rich raspberry. So I'm just going to come in. So take your stamp and really ink it up well with that fresh freesia. And this is one where actually adding it with the brush works better because it's such a deep colour. So there we go. So you see that adds a lot of depth of colour in there. If I compare that with just stamped in fresh freesia, she says, hopefully need a scrap of paper. So fresh freesia on its own is quite pale, but just adding that rich raspberry just really brings that to life. Well, I feel it does. Next thing you want to do is take your sentiment, and I want to stamp it first in my fresh freesia, and I'm just going to stamp the very top section of that because I just want the width deepest, and then turn it around, give it a quick wipe. It's where your chamois really comes into its own, and ink up just the bottom section of the stamp. Make sure you've got the whole of the sympathy, and then you're going to stamp that as well. And that way, by stamping that kind of word that you want to emphasise in a slightly darker colour, just brings it to life a little bit more. Let's clear the decks. So now we're going to do a bit of die cutting and fussy cutting. So first of all, I'm going to cut my with deepest out, and I'm just going to rough cut those first, rather than manipulating that big piece of card. And I'm just coming in quite close and straight on the top there. So I'm going to cut my deepest first. And that one does, you need to cut quite close to the edge of the T to avoid the sympathy, so pop that there. Add my width. And then I'm just going to fussy cut that. Being rich raspberry, I need to keep my inky fingers out of the way, because it's one of those inks that takes it's very deeply pigmented, so it just takes a little while to dry. Probably should have waited a little bit longer. And it's one of those, it's my nemesis. I get it everywhere. So just now, if you don't like fussy cutting, or you don't enjoy it, then just add the whole of the sentiment onto a square, add it onto, grab a punch and punch it out. There's lots of ways around this. I just rather like it just as a change. And I go through spells where I seem to do it a lot. It just seemed to fit with this style of card somehow. Just going to come up and round that last little bit, and then I'm just going to come in a little bit more. Finish those off. And unfortunately, there's sort of cards that you just need to have on hand every so often. So there we go. Now, in terms of the dies, as I said, they are fabulous detailed dies, as you would expect. I've just added simply a piece of post-it note tape onto the bottom, onto these. So just when you line it up, when you just make sure that you kind of haven't got any more white showing on one side than the other, and it kind of hugs the image. Bit of post-it note tape. If you haven't got a magnetic plate, that works really well. We've got one for this lovely little, they almost look like kind of winter, are they winter berries? Like white berries that we have. There we go. And then we've got our other large die for this one here as well. Okay, so I'm just going to die cut those, and I shall stamp another one of each and be back in a moment. So here we go. Now what we want to do is, while those I've die cut those, so I have got a couple of the sprigs. I've got myself some of my long ones, and I've also got some of the lovely sort of purpley berries as well. In terms of the card, we're going to want to grab our envelope to do a bit of stamping, and we've also got our front panel, and we've got our main layer. So let's make our card base, because I forgot to do that earlier. So you need a piece of card that is 21 centimetres, and I've actually done this by 19, and that is simply so that I've kind of, it's 2/3 of a piece of cardstock. So I've just scored simply at 9.5 on there, which means that I've got a layer here, which is going to go on the front, and this is going to be 9 by 20.5. So I'm just going to double check that, because I have a feeling I haven't, no, it's okay, I have actually trim that down, and it say it's white on white, but I just think it just adds that little bit extra to have a layer on the top there. So I've used my thick basic white for my card base. That gives it a bit more, particularly where I'm not putting lots of layers on the front, it makes the card stand up much better. So there's my card. I'm going to stamp on the inside there, we're going to stamp on the front of this, and we're going to stamp on the envelope as well. So first of all, I'm going to take my soft sea foam, and I'm just going to use that splatter from the Forever Fern stamp set. So some of this will be covered up by our foliage, and I'm just coming down and repeat stamping, and I generally try and turn that around. Add a bit more where you feel it's necessary. Just adds a little bit of interest to the background. I'm going to grab my I'm going to get my soft sea foam back out. Just going to grab that image of the leaf and just pop that in the corner there. I'm not going to, in this instance, bother with adding any extra colour. This is just to add some interest to the inside of our card. Just adds a bit there, and do the same on envelope. Okay, and now we're ready to start decorating, putting together layers on our cards. So what I started by doing, I put that to one side, is just adding, I sort of popped this up towards the top left, and I just kind of mirrored these across the top and the bottom of the card bit of this layer for the card, like so. The next ones I'm actually going to, what I did was I shaped these very gently. Just run your bone folder, don't pull too hard, otherwise you will pull the leaves apart. And so if you and obviously shape them before we put the dimensionals on the back. And what I did with these berries as well is I just trimmed off the stem because I wanted them to overlap in the middle, and it kind of looked a bit messy with those stems, so I just grabbed my snips and just cut around those bottom two of berries. And then this is where our mini dimensionals come into their own, because they are just perfect, these. So I tend to, when I'm adding leaves, is leave those, pop the dimensionals down the centre, because that allows the leaves to kind of curl more naturally around. That was really helpful, just covering up there you go, my dimensionals, what I'm actually doing. So as you can see, I'm just kind of literally just popping a couple on each of those. And then I just did the same again, sort of mirroring each of those pieces. And then adding in my, and that's where, you know, if you've got one that's slightly darker than the others, it would just sort of naturally sit in the background, being a little bit darker. I mean, I could have put one actually in rich raspberry. It might have just been a little bit too dark, but you can see by cutting off the stems that seems to make a more natural overlap in the centre there. And then all I've got to do is add my dimensionals onto the back here, and I do tend to, this is where I tend to use the side piece of these mini dimensionals just to cut a couple of narrow strips, because when you fussy cut something out, sometimes you get some quite thin bits that are even a little small for a dimensional, but these little words do fit well with a dimensional. So then you can pop your sentiment wherever you want, but I felt that it fitted best down at the bottom here. And now bring out the big boys. So we want to bring out the big dimensionals, and this is quite a large back layer, so I am putting a number of dimensionals as we go along here, just to make sure that that is well supported, as you can see, so both on the side and in the centre. And then I'm just going to open my card out, making sure it's oriented correctly, and I'm just going to remove those dimensionals. Like so. And then just layer that up on the front of your card. Now obviously if you'd like to buy these, I'd love it if you chose me as your demonstrator. Just pop along to my shop at flutterbyheidi.co.uk or heidismith.stampinup.net. But there you have two cards, one in Fresh Freesia, one in mainly Blushing Bride, with a bit of accents of rich raspberry and flirty flamingo. I hope you like them. Do come back and see me again soon, and please hit that subscribe button if you can, and get notifications of when I next come to do a video. Great to have more subscribers. Thank you for watching. Bye now.